They told me I have maybe 6 months before my mind starts slipping away completely. And there's something I buried so deep in my heart that I can't let it disappear with me. This isn't just another sad story about getting old. This is about a secret that's been eating at me for 63 years. And if I don't tell it now, it'll die with me. And that would be the greatest tragedy of all. But before I lose you in the first 30 seconds, let me tell you why you need to stay until the very end. Somewhere out there is a 63-year-old man who was born on Valentine's Day 1960. And he has no idea that his biological mother has been searching for him every single day since the moment they ripped him from her arms. And that woman, that heartbroken 20-year-old girl who became a secret-keeping 83-year-old, is sitting right here in front of you, racing against Alzheimer's disease to find her son before her memory disappears forever. My name is Joanne. I'm 83 years old, and I'm recording this because my doctor says the darkness is coming for my mind, but there's one light I refuse to let it extinguish. You see, in 1960, when Eisenhower was still president and the world was a very different place for women like me, I gave birth to a baby boy that I never got to hold for more than 30 seconds, never got to name officially, never got to raise, and every single day since then, I've wondered if he's alive, if he's happy, if he knows his mother never stopped loving him. Right now, as I'm speaking these words, I can feel my mind playing tricks on me. Yesterday, I couldn't remember my own zip code that I've had for 40 years, but I remember every single detail of that snowy February morning when they stole my child from me. The way the fluorescent lights hummed in that sterile hospital room, the scratch of the nurse's starched uniform, the sound of his first cry that pierced through my heart like a sword, the warmth of his tiny body for those precious few seconds before they whisked him away like he was evidence of a crime instead of a miracle of life. You want to know what real heartbreak feels like? It's having perfect recall of the worst moment of your life while forgetting what you ate for breakfast this morning. It's remembering every word the social worker said to shame you while forgetting your best friend's name. It's holding on to the memory of your child's first breath while losing the ability to remember how to tie your own shoes. That's what Alzheimer's does to you. It's cruel and selective and completely merciless. But here's what I need everyone watching this to understand. And if you've made it this far, please comment below and tell me where you're joining me from, because I need to know I'm not alone in this fight against time. Back in 1960, things weren't just different for young women like me, they were brutal. If you weren't married and you got pregnant, you weren't just bringing shame on yourself. You were destroying your entire family's reputation, your father's career, your mother's standing in the community, your siblings' chances of decent marriages. My father was Harrison Keller, Vice President of First National Bank of Marysville, Ohio. My mother was Evelyn Keller, President of the Marysville Methodist Church Ladies Auxiliary and the most respected woman in our county. When they found out I was carrying a child, they didn't see a grandchild. They didn't see new life. They saw a scandal that would destroy everything they'd spent 30 years building. So they shipped me off to Columbus like I was damaged goods that needed to be hidden away until the problem could be solved. You know what breaks my heart more than anything else in this whole tragic story? I never even got to see his face clearly. They had me so drugged up during the delivery, pumping me full of whatever they gave unwed mothers in those days to keep us quiet and compliant. One moment I was pushing with every ounce of strength I had, feeling this incredible, overwhelming love filling every cell in my body. And the next moment, he was gone. Just gone. Like he had never existed at all. The social worker, Mrs. Patterson, God rest her probably long dead soul, looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes behind her thick glasses and told me it was better this way. She said it would be easier for me to move on if I didn't form an attachment, if I didn't see his face or hold him or learn his features. But how do you not form an attachment to a piece of your own soul? How do you not love something that grew inside your body for 9 months? How do you not dream about someone who kicked you awake every night, reminding you of their existence? I need you to understand something about those times that younger people watching this might not grasp. There were no support systems for single mothers, no programs to help young women keep their babies, no understanding that maybe, just maybe, a mother's love could be enough to overcome social stigma. The pressure to give up your child wasn't just social, it was economic, it was religious, it was legal, it was absolute and crushing and inescapable. They told me I was doing the noble thing, the selfless thing, the Christian thing. They said I was giving my baby a chance at a real life with a real family, that I was being mature and responsible by admitting I couldn't provide what he needed. But all I felt was this gaping hole in my chest that never ever healed, this phantom pain where my heart used to be, this constant ache that no amount of time or therapy or prayer could touch. For 63 years, I've carried this secret like a tumor in my chest. I got married 5 years later to a wonderful man named Robert Clemmons. May his soul rest in peace. And we tried for years and years to have children of our own. Month after month, we'd hope and pray and plan, buying little baby clothes that never got worn, painting a nursery that never got used, choosing names for children who never came. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong with either of us. Dr. Morrison, our family physician, ran every test known to medical science in the 1960s. He said we were both perfectly healthy, perfectly capable of conceiving, that we just needed to relax and let nature take its course. But I knew deep in my bones, I knew that having given away my first child was some kind of cosmic punishment, that God was making me pay for the sin of abandoning my baby by never allowing me another chance at motherhood. Robert never knew about Michael. That's what I called him in my heart, Michael Robert, after my father's middle name and the man I loved. How could I tell Robert about my son? How could I explain that I'd already been a mother, that there was already a child out there carrying my DNA but not my name, my blood but not my love, my features but not my guidance? Every time Robert would talk about wanting to start a family, every time he'd hold his friends' babies with such tender longing in his eyes, I'd feel this crushing, suffocating guilt that I was keeping such a huge part of myself hidden from the man I'd promised to share everything with. The lies I had to tell were eating me alive from the inside out. When Robert would ask why I sometimes cried for no apparent reason, I'd blame it on hormones or stress or anything except the truth. When he'd find me staring out the window on February 14th every year, lost in grief and regret, I'd pretend I was just feeling melancholy about Valentine's Day. When he'd suggest we get fertility treatments or consider adoption, I'd make excuses about being too young or too busy or too scared, when the real reason was that I felt like I didn't deserve another child after abandoning the first one. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different if I'd been braver, if I'd fought harder against my parents' iron will, but you have, to understand the world I lived in. This was 1959 when I got pregnant, 3 years before the birth control pill was even available to married women, let alone unmarried girls. This was a time when girls who got pregnant out of wedlock were sent away to maternity homes where they were treated like criminals, where they were forced to wear wedding rings and fake names so the other residents wouldn't know they were unmarried. Say, father of my baby was Tommy Henderson, a boy from Ohio State University, who I met at a church social in the fall of 1959. He was studying to be an engineer, came from a good family 2 towns over, and he had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen on any human being. We started seeing each other secretly because my parents thought I was too young for serious dating, meeting at the library or the soda fountain downtown, sharing dreams about the future that seemed so bright and possible. Tommy was my first love, my first kiss, my first everything. When he told me he loved me that cold December night in his father's Chevrolet, parked by Miller's Pond under the stars, I believed him with every fiber of my innocent, trusting heart. When things went further than we'd planned, when passion overcame good sense, I thought it meant we'd be together forever. I thought love was enough to overcome any obstacle, any problem, any consequence. But when I told Tommy I was pregnant, when I shared what I thought was joyous news about the child we'd created together, he looked at me like I'd just told him I had some contagious disease. The boy who'd whispered sweet promises in my ear just weeks before suddenly couldn't get away from me fast enough. He said it wasn't his baby, that I was trying to trap him, that I was probably sleeping around with other boys and trying to pin the blame on him. The cruelest part was how quickly he turned our entire relationship into something dirty and shameful. Those tender moments we'd shared, those whispered conversations about getting married after his graduation, those plans we'd made for a future together, suddenly became evidence of my moral failing. He spread rumors around campus that I was loose, that I was the kind of girl who would do anything with anyone, that no decent boy should trust me. I was completely alone in the world, with a growing baby inside me and nowhere to turn. My parents found out when I fainted during Sunday service, and Dr. Morrison had to examine me. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when the doctor quietly told him the news. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disappointment, it was pure, unadulterated shame, like I had personally destroyed everything he'd worked his entire life to achieve. My mother's reaction was even worse. She didn't speak to me for 3 days, just walked around the house like I didn't exist, like I'd already been erased from the family. When she finally broke her silence, it was to tell me that I was going to Columbus to stay with my Aunt Margaret until the situation was resolved. She couldn't even say the word pregnant, couldn't acknowledge that there was a baby, a grandchild, growing inside her own daughter. The home for unwed mothers was called Mercy House, which was the most ironic name possible because there was no mercy there, no compassion, no understanding. It was run by the Catholic Church and staffed by nuns who seemed to believe that pregnancy out of wedlock was the worst sin a woman could commit, something that needed to be punished as much as hidden. We weren't allowed to use our real names. I became Mary Smith for those 4 months, just another fallen woman being corrected and redeemed through shame and isolation. We weren't allowed to receive visitors, weren't allowed to make phone calls, weren't allowed to leave the grounds except for medical appointments. We were prisoners of our own biology, inmates in a jail built from social expectations and religious judgment. The other girls there were just like me, scared and alone and heartbroken. There was Linda, who was 16 and had been raped by her stepfather, but whose mother blamed her for tempting him. There was Susan, who was 22 and engaged to be married, but her fiancé broke off the engagement the moment he found out about her condition. There was Patricia, who was only 15 and so traumatized by what had happened to her that she barely spoke the entire time she was there. We formed a sisterhood of sorts, bonding over our shared shame and fear. We'd whisper to each other after, lights out, sharing stories about the boys who'd abandoned us, the families who'd rejected us, the futures that had been stolen from us. We'd comfort each other through morning sickness and swollen ankles, and the crushing loneliness that came from being cut off from everything familiar. But the most heartbreaking part was watching each other go into labor and then return empty-handed, empty-hearted, empty-wombed. One by one, we'd disappear to the hospital and come back hollow-eyed and silent, carrying the kind of grief that has no name. We'd try to comfort each other, but what words exist for that kind of loss? What solace can you offer someone whose child has been legally stolen from them? My labor started on February 13th, 1960, right in the middle of a blizzard that shut down half of Ohio. The contractions came fast and hard, like my body was trying to hold on to the baby as long as possible. Knowing what was coming, I labored for 14 hours, clutching the rosary my mother had given me for confirmation, praying to a God who seemed to have abandoned me completely. When Michael finally arrived at 3:47 a.m. on Valentine's Day, the room was silent except for his cries. No one congratulated me. No one celebrated the miracle of new life. No one acknowledged that something beautiful had just happened despite the circumstances. The nurse cleaned him off efficiently, weighed him, measured him, recorded his statistics in a chart that I would never be allowed to see. But for 30 seconds, maybe 45, she let me hold him. And in that brief, shining moment, everything else disappeared. The shame, the fear, the regret, the pain, all of it vanished, and there was only love. Pure, perfect, unconditional love flowing between a mother and her child. I looked into his tiny face, memorized every feature, whispered that I loved him and that I was sorry, so very sorry for what was about to happen. His eyes were dark blue, almost navy, and they seemed to look right into my soul. His hair was thick and black, just like mine had been when I was born. He had long fingers like his grandfather Harrison and a stubborn chin like me. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, and he was mine for less than a minute before they took him away forever. The hardest part wasn't just giving him up, it was pretending it never happened afterward. Going back to Marysville, finishing my senior year of college, dating other boys, smiling at family gatherings where my mother would talk about how excited she was to eventually become a grandmother, knowing all the while that she already was one but had chosen to erase that grandchild from existence. I became an expert at compartmentalizing, at building walls around the grief so it wouldn't consume me entirely. I threw myself into my studies, graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State, got a job teaching elementary school in a neighboring county where no one knew about my past. I dated nice boys from good families, went to church socials and community events, played the part of the respectable young woman I was supposed to be. But inside, I was broken in ways that never healed. Every baby I saw made me wonder about Michael. Every Valentine's Day felt like attending my own child's funeral. Every Mother's Day was a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd been forced to give up, what I'd never have again. When I met Robert in 1964, I thought maybe I could finally move on, finally build a new life that would make sense of all the pain. He was kind and gentle and patient, everything Tommy Henderson hadn't been. He worked at the post office, came from a stable family, and he loved me with the kind of steady, reliable love that I thought might heal my wounded heart. But how do you build a marriage on a lie? How do you promise to share everything with someone when you're hiding the most important thing that ever happened to you? Every time Robert talked about wanting children, every time he'd see me with my students and comment on what a natural mother I was, I'd feel this crushing guilt that I was deceiving him about who I really was. We tried for children for 12 years, 12 long, heartbreaking years of hope and disappointment, of temperature charts and doctor visits and fertility treatments that were primitive by today's standards. Every month when my period came, I'd lock myself in the bathroom and cry for the child I'd given away and the children who would never come. Robert never blamed me, never suggested it was my fault, never made me feel defective or broken. He'd hold me while I cried and tell me that maybe God had other plans for us, that maybe we were meant to love other people's children through my teaching instead of having our own. His kindness made the secret even harder to bear, because I knew he deserved better than a wife who couldn't tell him the truth about her past. The closest I ever came to telling him was in 1972, on what would have been Michael's 12th birthday. I'd been crying all morning, unable to function, unable to explain why I was so devastated. Robert sat me down and asked me directly if there was something I wasn't telling him, if there was some reason why having children seemed to bring me such pain instead of joy. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, to finally share the burden I'd been carrying alone for 12 years. But then I imagined the look that would come into his eyes, the way he'd question everything about our relationship, the way he might never look at me the same way again. So I lied. Again. I told him I was just feeling sorry for myself, that I was being silly and emotional, that I'd be fine in the morning. The look of relief on his face told me I'd made the right choice, even though it felt like another small death inside my chest. He couldn't handle the truth about my past, couldn't accept that his pure, innocent wife had once been an unwed mother who'd given away her child. It would have destroyed him, and I loved him too much to do that. But the secret poisoned everything, even the good times. When we'd babysit for friends, or when I'd hold my students' younger siblings, I'd wonder if Michael was the same age, if he looked anything like the child in my arms, if somewhere in the world there was a 12-year-old boy who had no idea his biological mother was holding another child and thinking about him. I started having dreams about Michael, vivid dreams where I could see his face clearly, where I could hold him and talk to him and make up for all the lost time. In my dreams, he was always the age he should have been in real life, growing up alongside my subconscious, becoming a teenager when he would have been 13, graduating from high school in my sleep when he should have been 18 in the waking world. Sometimes the dreams were beautiful, full of the conversations we should have had, the birthdays we should have celebrated, the milestones we should have shared. But sometimes they were nightmares where he was angry at me for abandoning him, where he blamed me for choosing my reputation over his well-being, where he asked me how I could claim to love him when I'd given him away so easily. Those nightmare dreams felt more real than the beautiful ones, because they echoed the fears that haunted me every waking moment. What if Michael hated me? What if he'd grown up feeling unwanted and unloved, not understanding that his mother had been forced to give him up? What if he'd spent his childhood wondering why he wasn't good enough to keep, why his own mother had chosen strangers over her own flesh and blood? As the years passed, I tried different ways to find him. This was long before the internet made searching easier, long before DNA tests and social media and all the tools people have now. I contacted Sacred Heart Family Services multiple times, but they said their records were sealed by law and couldn't be opened without a court order that I had no legal standing to obtain. I hired a private investigator in 1983, a man named Detective Morrison, who specialized in adoption reunions. He was expensive, cost me most of my summer vacation savings, but he seemed confident that he could find some trace of Michael's adoptive family. For 3 months, I lived on hope and desperate prayers, imagining the phone call that would tell me where my son was, whether he was happy, if he wanted to meet me. But Detective Morrison hit one dead end after another. The adoption agency had destroyed most of their older files in a fire in 1975. The hospital records from 1960 had been moved to a warehouse and were inaccessible without specific authorization. The few leads he managed to uncover all turned into false trails that went nowhere. When he finally called to tell me he couldn't find any concrete information about Michael's placement, I felt like I was losing my son all over again. It was almost worse than the original loss, because now I knew for certain that I might never find him, that he might remain a ghost forever, existing somewhere in the world, but invisible to me. I started visiting cemeteries, not because I thought Michael was dead, but because I needed somewhere to go to mourn him. I'd bring flowers to unmarked graves, children who had died young, babies who never got to grow up, and I'd pretend I was visiting my son. It was morbid and probably unhealthy, but it was the only way I could find peace with the loss. Over the years, I became obsessed with adoption reunion stories. Every magazine article, every television special, every news story about families finding each other after decades apart. I devoured them all. I joined support groups for birth mothers, reading newsletters and attending meetings where women like me shared their stories of loss and hope and occasional miraculous reunions. But for every happy ending I heard about, there were dozens of stories like mine. Women who searched for decades without success. children who were never found, families that remained forever separated by sealed records and changed names and the simple passage of time. The statistics were heartbreaking. Less than 5% of birth mothers from the 1950s and 1960s ever reunited with their children. Still, I never gave up hope completely. I used to drive past high schools during graduation season, scanning the faces of young men who might be the right age, looking for some resemblance, some sign that maybe one of them was Michael. I'd study newspaper birth announcements, looking for babies born to parents who might have adopted a child 18 years earlier, wondering if I was looking at my potential grandchildren. When the internet finally became accessible to ordinary people in the 1990s, I thought surely this would be the tool that would help me find Michael. I learned to use computers, figured out how to search adoption reunion websites, posted my information on every registry I could find. I created email accounts specifically for the search, hoping that someday I'd open my inbox and find a message from a son I'd been seeking for 35 years. But the internet was also full of scams and false hopes. I got contacted by people claiming to be Michael, wanting money or personal information, or just playing cruel jokes on desperate mothers. I learned to be skeptical of every lead, to verify every claim, to protect myself from the predators who prey on grieving parents. The worst false alarm came in 1998 when a man named Mike Kellerman contacted me through one of the reunion websites. He said he'd been born on February 14, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, and adopted through Sacred Heart Family Services. He knew details about the agency that seemed too specific to be coincidental, and he even resembled what I imagined Michael might look like as an adult. We corresponded by email for weeks, sharing stories about our lives, trying to piece together whether we were really mother and son. I told him about the circumstances of his birth, about my parents' reaction, about the blizzard that had raged while I was in labor. He seemed to remember things that felt right, details that matched my own memories of that time. I was so convinced that I'd finally found Michael that I agreed to meet Mike in person. We arranged to meet at a restaurant halfway between our cities, and I drove there with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I'd brought photo albums, baby clothes I'd secretly bought and saved over the years, letters I'd written to him but never sent. But the moment I saw Mike Kellerman walk into that restaurant, I knew he wasn't my son. There was nothing specific I could point to, no obvious physical difference, just a complete absence of the connection I'd expected to feel. We had dinner anyway, talked about our lives, and he eventually admitted that he'd been contacting several birth mothers, hoping to find one who might want to maintain a relationship, even if they weren't biologically related. That disappointment nearly broke me. I'd allowed myself to hope so completely, to imagine so vividly what it would be like to finally hold my son again, that the letdown was almost unbearable. Robert found me crying in the kitchen when I got home that night, and I came closer than ever to telling him the truth about why I was so devastated. But by then, we'd been married for 34 years, and the lie had become so much a part of our relationship that I couldn't figure out how to unravel it without destroying everything else. How do you tell your husband of 3 decades that your entire marriage has been built on a deception? How do you explain that the woman he thought he knew has never really existed? So I swallowed the pain once again, told Robert I was just going through a difficult time emotionally, and tried to rebuild my shattered hopes. I continued searching, continued posting on websites, continued believing that someday, somehow, Michael and I would find each other. Hope became as much a part of my daily routine as breathing, as automatic and necessary, and sometimes as painful. When Robert died in 2015, after a brief battle with cancer, I thought maybe his death would finally free me to search more openly for Michael. I could travel to different cities, hire more investigators, spend money on the search without having to explain or hide my activities. But grief and loneliness consumed so much of my energy that I could barely function, let alone conduct an intensive search. And then, just as I was starting to emerge from the fog of widowhood, just as I was beginning to think about renewing my search efforts, the doctor delivered the diagnosis that changed everything. Alzheimer's disease. Early stage, but progressing. Maybe 5 years if I was lucky. Maybe less if I wasn't. Suddenly, finding Michael wasn't just a lifelong dream. It was a race against time. Every day that passed was a day closer to losing the memories that connected me to him. Every forgotten detail was a piece of our story disappearing forever. The disease that was supposed to steal my past might also steal my last chance at reuniting with my son. That's when I decided to make this video. My friend Margaret, who's known me since we were girls and is one of the few people who knows about Michael, suggested I contact this channel, Echoes of Real Lives. She said they specialize in helping people tell their stories when time is running short, that maybe someone watching would have information that could help. At first, I resisted the idea of making my pain so public, of exposing my decades-old secret to strangers on the internet. But then I realized that privacy and dignity were luxuries I could no longer afford. If going public with my story was the only way to reach Michael before my mind failed completely, then that's what I had to do. So here I am, 83 years, old and fighting for every clear memory I have left, telling the world about the son I gave up and never stopped loving. Here I am, risking judgment and criticism and possible heartbreak, because the alternative is letting Alzheimer's win without a fight. If you're still watching, if you've stayed with me through this entire painful story, then you understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about an old woman's regrets or a family secret finally coming to light. This is about the power of love to transcend time and circumstance, about the hope that can survive decades of separation, about the possibility that some bonds are too strong to be broken permanently. Michael, if you're watching this, if you recognize yourself in these details, I need you to know that not a single day has passed in 63 years without me thinking about you. I need you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I ever did, but it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you so much that I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you in 1960. I need you to know that you weren't a mistake or an accident or a burden. You were a miracle, a perfect little person who brought joy into my life even though I was only allowed to experience that joy for a few precious moments. You were wanted and loved and treasured, even if I couldn't show you that in the way a mother should. If you're angry at me for giving you up, I understand. If you blame me for not fighting harder to keep you, I accept that blame. If you never want to see me or speak to me, I'll respect that decision. But please, please don't spend your life thinking you are unloved or unwanted, because nothing could be further from the truth. And if you're not Michael, if you're just someone who has been kind enough to listen to an old woman's heartbreak, I'm asking for your help. Share this video with everyone you know. Post it on social media, send it to friends, talk about it with your families. You never know who might have information, who might remember something that could lead us to each other. If you work in adoption, services, if you have access to old records, if you know anything about Sacred Heart Family Services in Columbus, Ohio, please reach out to the people at Echoes of Real Lives. If you were born on Valentine's Day in 1960 and adopted as a baby, please consider that you might be the child I've been searching for all these years. If you know someone who fits that description, please share this story with them. Time is running out for me, but it's not too late for us to find each other. My memory is failing, my body is growing weak, but my love for Michael is as strong today as it was the moment they placed him in my arms 63 years ago. That love has sustained me through decades of grief and regret, and it's what drives me to keep searching even when hope seems impossible. The doctors say I have good days and bad days ahead of me, days when I'll remember everything clearly and days when I won't remember my own name. But I believe, I have to believe, that love is stronger than any disease, that some connections transcend physical brain function, that a mother's heart can remember what her mind might forget. This is my love letter to a son I barely got to. No, My apology for a decision I was too young and scared to fight against. My hope that somewhere out there is a man who might be willing to forgive an old woman's greatest regret and accept her greatest love. This is my race against time, against a disease that wants to steal my memories, against the possibility that I might die without ever seeing his face again. Please, don't let this story end in silence. Please help me prove that some things are too important to forget, that some people are too precious to lose, that some love stories deserve happy endings even when they seem impossible. Please be part of a reunion that has been 63 years in the making. My name is Joanne Clemmons. I am 83 years old. I am Michael's mother, and I am running out of time to tell him how much I love him. But with your help, maybe, just maybe, it's not too late for us to find each other before the darkness takes my memories away forever. Please help me find my son. Please help love win over time. Please help me prove that some bonds are too strong to be broken, even by decades of separation and the cruelest disease known to humanity. This is Joanne, and I'm not giving up. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not as long as there's breath in my body and love in my heart. Please help me find Michael.